Hi, this is Teddy, and you're listening to Jamie McLeod-Skinner in Oregon on Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Debcast Podcast Network.
Are you listening?
Hi everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Debcast family of podcasts, and I'm on today with a returning guest. This is Jamie McLeod-Skinner, who is running for Secretary of State in Oregon. Hi, Jamie.
Hey, Kelly. How are you doing?
Great. So last time we talked, back in 2018, I believe you had pulled over to the side of the road in your camper to talk to me. So times have changed.
Yeah, well, we're not, now we're all, or most of us are homebound or spending most of our time at home with the pandemic. So yeah, a lot less time on the road.
Yeah. So I want to talk some about your background in emergency response, but maybe we could start just by talking a little bit about why you're running for Secretary of State.
Yeah, and there's so much, we're so focused on the immediacy of the pandemic right now, as we need to be to protect our families and our communities. But we also are needing to gear up and really think long term and how, what our leadership's going to be looking like after the 2020 election. And this is such a critical election. So needing to balance those two things is just a real important thing for us all to be doing right now. Oregon's Secretary of State has many roles. One is overseeing election integrity and security, which is critically important. The other is overseeing audit of state agencies. And actually, Oregon's I think it's the only state in the country that the Secretary of State also has that role of making sure government is accountable. Also is one of the three people that sits on what we call our state land board. So Western states have a lot more public lands. And so the state land board it's the governor, the Secretary of State, and the state treasurer that oversees the use of our state lands and public waterways. The Oregon Secretary of State also oversees business registration, so interaction with businesses, and the state archives. But two of the really important aspects of the role and why the Oregon Secretary of State race is important for really folks statewide is the election piece, but it's also because the Secretary of State is Lieutenant Governor and will likely be responsible for redistricting following the 2020 census. And so hopefully everyone's getting their census data in. But after the census, the redrawing of political boundaries, redistricting, is something that all states will be looking at. And here in Oregon, our legislature draws the political boundaries. But if that system fails, and there's been walkouts the last two sessions, the last 2 years, then that responsibility falls to the Secretary of State. And so one of the concerns here in Oregon is that our progressive state could go the way of Wisconsin under Scott Walker if we don't get redistricting right. So it's a really important role for Oregonians and really, again, for folks nationwide. And I've just got a really strong background in all aspects of the role. Democracy and protecting our democracy and making sure we have accountable government is really two of the most critical things right now at the national level, at the state level, at the local level as well. And that's why I'm running.
And people may be fairly surprised to know that in Oregon, which people think of as such a blue state, there's actually a Republican Secretary of State right now.
That's right. There's a growing tension. We're seeing this nationwide, but also here in Oregon, of the kind of that urban-rural divide. And what has typically happened in Oregon is that a lot of our statewide offices are held by folks who live in the Portland metro area. It's the kind of the big metro area for our state. But in 2016, in the last cycle, a Republican won because there was a real pushback on not just wanting all of our statewide offices to be managed by someone who just lived in the major urban metro area. My wife and I live in Central Oregon. We're rural Democrats. And having those connections and that understanding of the issues and concerns statewide is a really important part of this role. The other thing is being able to again use this opportunity. This is a red to blue opportunity here in Oregon, and it's an open seat. There won't be someone running, so it's an open seat. But I've got a tough primary, and our ballots drop late April.
Yeah, and so when you say your ballots drop, Oregon has led the way in this vote by mail that more states are now, we're already thinking of, and especially in the midst of this pandemic, are thinking of more. Tell me a little bit about how the vote by mail works in Oregon, and will it be able to go sort of the way it always has with the situation we're facing? Will there be any changes?
We should be pretty much business as usual, and that was just confirmed by our current Secretary of State. And what happens is our election day is May 19th, but we're an all vote by mail state. And so ballots will go out in late April. And we actually have not only our ballots mailed out, but postage is paid. And so it really, we work very hard to reduce barriers for voters. The other thing, and this is a big issue really across the country, is folks who are homeless, houseless, or housing insecure. And what you can do here in Oregon is actually designate a location where you will receive your ballot so that everyone who is eligible can vote. But part of it is just making sure people know that. And what we're hoping to do is really lead the way nationally. Our senators have stepped up. Senator Ron Wyden has stepped up and tried to secure funding so that we could possibly go to paper ballots and to mail-in ballots nationwide. It's a real opportunity to make sure that people get access to the ballot box if they can't show up on election day. And also, of course, in the times we're in right now with COVID-19, it's a way to be able to still continue with our elections, but do so safely and from a distance.
So I know you have some background in emergency response, emergency management. Can you tell me a little bit about the background that you have?
Sure. After I finished high school in Southern Oregon, I got degrees in civil engineering and in regional planning, and then wanted to really follow in my family's footsteps in terms of public service. The war in Bosnia and Kosovo had just ended, and because I'd come out as a young adult, the military service in the military was not an option when you came out in the mid 80s. So I ended up working for a humanitarian organization over in Bosnia and Kosovo, the International Rescue Committee, and I managed the reconstruction of schools and hospitals, also the design of water and sanitation systems. So was involved in, while the war had formally ended, there were still landmines everywhere, a lot of folks with weapons, and it was still a very unstable environment. So my job was to make sure that I kept my team safe and got the job done. That level of kind of emergency situation training and experience is something that is getting a lot more attention now from folks, given that we're in a pandemic, and that understanding of that leadership being important. When I wanted to come back to the States, the International Rescue Committee asked me to run their refugee resettlement office in the Bay Area. So I was regional director there and oversaw the resettlement of families who were fleeing an unstable environment and needing to resettle and connect and become self-sufficient. And everything from the challenge that many families are now facing with this pandemic to also, frankly, our housing insecure population. It's almost the equivalent of being domestic refugees. And so that experience with vulnerable communities, with very diverse communities, helping people get access to the vote, to their vote. So part of our services included naturalization services, helping people engage in the voting process, was all work I've done with refugee and immigrant communities throughout on the West Coast. And then another thing is when I then went into work for local government as a city planner, as a regional planner in the Bay Area. I served on the Santa Clara City Council for 8 years. During that time and in that location, we had training on what's called NIMS, the National Incident Management System. And that's an emergency response type training system. So that background, the executive level leadership and executive management experience is something that's really, it's a unique feature that I bring to this race that some of my colleagues who are also running don't have. But it's also, I'm hearing more and more from voters, people want that sense of that sense of having people in leadership who can adjust and adapt and address issues that come up that we hadn't even anticipated, things like COVID-19.
So I think one of the things that hadn't really occurred to me and maybe to other people as well before this current pandemic hit is just all the different levels of government in the U.S. where this executive management needs to happen. So now, especially with the lack of action at the federal level, we're seeing states have to take action in counties and cities, various different levels of government. So, have you seen examples around the country of places where this emergency management is being very well handled, or, particular examples of where it's not, where you think it would be useful to have people with these skills?
Well, I have to say, I'm very disappointed in the president and his trying to politicize this, and then also the constant mixed messages that he's sending. We need leadership that is really focused on providing a sense of steadiness in addressing and responding to crisis and bringing people together, and not politicizing at a time when really literally lives are at stake. I'm really proud of our governor here in Oregon, Kate Brown. I think she's doing a great job of surrounding herself with experts. She's, hearing all the different options and talking to her colleagues at the state level in our neighboring states, and really thinking through what the different options are and then being decisive in making decisions. She's also, and I think many states that are similar to Oregon that have, large urban and rural areas, trying to hear the different needs and issues in different areas, because the challenges that are posed and the resources that are available and the specific community needs differs from region to region. And so I know she's been reaching out to local elected officials and making sure her ears to the ground in terms of hearing what different challenges folks are facing at the local level. But your point, and I think it's a really important one, is to realize that those different levels of government, be it from the city municipal level to the state level to the regional level, all of those aspects of government typically have different responsibilities, but need to be able to work together very seamlessly. I've worked as a city manager for a small city in Southern Oregon, and there were different challenges that we faced at different times, and the ability to engage and work with elected representatives at all levels was really key to making sure we could be successful. I'm now in Central Oregon and serve on the Jefferson County Education Service District Board, it provides resources to our school boards. And we're working to make sure we're providing the support needed for local school boards and for our schools. One of the things that I'm really proud of that Oregon's doing in many of our school districts across the state is our bus drivers in our schools are doing kind of a reverse of picking students up. So we have a lot of families who kids don't have access to 3 meals a day during just because their families don't have that financial security. And so what we've got happening right now is we have school bus drivers dropping off meals for kids to pick up, not picking up the kids because we've got the social distancing and we're trying to minimize gathering of folks per the order of our governor. But we're trying to reverse that process to make sure our kids are still fed and taken care of during this time.
Yeah, that's excellent. So I know one thing I've been trying to think about, wrap my brain around is, we're all sort of thinking very much in the moment right now, which makes sense, is an important thing for us to think about. But, at some point we'll be on the other side of this, we'll be through this, and to your point earlier about thinking about elections in November, we need to think about sort of what kind of society we want coming out of all of this. So what is the role of emergency management in the moment of not just dealing with what are the decisions you're making for right now, but also sort of how do those things set the stage for what happens after?
Well, this is such a critical election with this president. We need to replace him. We need leadership that cares about people and cares about communities. And so we're going into such a critical election, and at the same time having to deal with the immediacy of this pandemic, as you've noted. So the focus on elections, election security and integrity is really important right now. Making sure people do vote. I know some states have postponed their primaries, but we must be able to move forward with the general election. We're here in Oregon. We're able to still move forward with our primary. We've got ideas we're happy to share with other states if they want to have vote by mail. We'll get that information out as soon as possible so they can still have their primaries. But we definitely need to go forward with our general election. Be thinking about the leadership we have after. Going forward and the leadership we'll have, we can't lose sight of climate issues. We still have to be thinking long term in terms of sustainability. We know there's going to be a huge impact on small businesses and the business sector, and so we'll need to have adaptation. But again, we need leaders who have big picture thinking and are incorporating all aspects of our community and not being short-sighted in terms of how we plan and prepare. And then even with our audit process, the Oregon Secretary of State oversees the audits of state agencies. Specific to COVID-19, one of the things I would do is audit our response. What did we do well? What could we do better next time? Because we do know that whatever, be it a natural disaster or some kind of crisis, others will come up. And so we need to be prepared for them. But also, how are we spending our limited resources? Are we making sure that they're being spent as intended? Are we using an equity lens when we think about how we spend resources? Are we incorporating the needs of our full community? That's the kind of perspective that we need going forward to make sure that we have sustainable, not just environment, but a sustainable economy as well. And so as people are thinking about this time we're in, I just strongly encourage folks to also try to focus on where are we going, what direction do we need to go, and what kind of leadership do we need to help get us there.
So you mentioned the primary is coming up. How can listeners help out with your campaign between now and then? And I guess at this point, it doesn't matter where in the country they live since it's all the same.
Absolutely. And so leadership on this is important across the country. But again, here in Oregon, our Secretary of State is Lieutenant Governor, and then also will likely be responsible for redistricting that will really shape the politics, also oversees the election process. So that's something that impacts all states. My website is jamiefororegon.com. That's JAMIEFOR Oregon, OREGON.com. And greatly appreciate any support people can give to, we're doing fundraising. I'm actually the only candidate in this race who's not taking corporate contributions from, in general, but especially from the fossil fuel industry, from big pharma. Our state has been devastated by the opioid crisis. And so specifically being accountable only to voters, I think is really important. And so getting some support and help there would be really appreciated. And then also, people can make calls and reach out to folks if they know folks in Oregon, or also just engaging in their social media network. It's Jamie McLeod-Skinner for Oregon is our Facebook and our Twitter and our Instagram site. So having folks engage that way and help spread the word would be really, really helpful. So we appreciate that help in our race, but also, think about your local and regional races and please do engage, because this is just a really critical election, and we need to not take our focus off of voting in the leadership that we need following this pandemic and following 2020. And then also don't forget your census data. That's critically important, turning in your census information.
Yes, and it's easy to do from home. I think it only took me 5 minutes when I did ours.
Yeah, my 2020census.gov, I think, is the website. My wife and I just did ours yesterday or the other day.
Is there anything else that you'd like to make sure we talk about?
I just, again, my website is jamiefororegon.com. Thank you for the work that you do to help get the word out and engage people in the political process. This is a critical time for our democracy. It has been undermined since the 2016 election by this president. And so getting new leadership and making sure we're rebuilding our politics and bridging the divides between us. I spent a lot of time bridging that urban-rural divide, even bridging the political divide. It's kind of a cliche, but it really is true that there is more that unites us than divides us, especially during a time of pandemic. And we have a real opportunity for leadership of bringing people together and moving forward in a positive way. We can have some different policy ideas, but this is a time to be bringing people together. So it's just bridging the many divides between us is really critical for us to be rebuilding a healthy, progressive democracy. To me, that's being progressive. That's a progressive pro-democracy approach. And so I appreciate your role in getting the word out, but also encourage folks to do their bit to keep our democracy healthy.
Excellent. I love that. And I love that idea of thinking about that as a progressive value. So, Jamie, I'm so excited that you're running for Secretary of State. And thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you again for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. So all the best. Take care. And thanks for the work you do.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.